Welcome to the Focus 3 podcast. Wherever you are and however you're listening, we are really glad you've tuned in. My name is Tim Kight, and I'm here with my co-host, Urban Meyer. Coach, greetings.
Good to see you, Tim.
Yep. Big message today is meetings. We live in a world where meetings are a part of organizational life. Unfortunately, a lot of those meetings that we're in are not very effective. They can be irritating for sure, but worse than irritating, they can actually be a drag on company and organizational performance. However, great leaders have great meetings, and we want to talk about the attributes of great meetings today. Before I get into that, though, I want to tell a little bit of a story. A friend of mine, Patrick Williams, shared with me a pretty interesting, funny story. He was driving his car recently and listening to the Focus 3 podcast, and it was the episode on You've Been Trained for This, and he was dialed in and apparently focusing a bit too much on the podcast, and all of a sudden he looked in the rearview mirror and there were lights behind him, and a highway patrolman had been following and pulled him off to the side of the road. Patrick continued to listen to the podcast even after he had pulled the side of the road. I think he pulled out his insurance and license to get ready and he heard a tap on the window, and there was the highway patrolman. And Patrick turned down the podcast and then rolled the window down, then turned on the podcast. And the officer, Urban, listen to this. The officer leaned in and said, "Is that Urban Meyer talking?" And Patrick said, "Yes, it is." Like, "Well, what are you listening to?" And Patrick said, "It's the Focus 3 podcast with Tim Kight and Urban Meyer." And the officer said, "Tim who?" And Patrick said, "Tim Kight." I've never heard of him, but I have heard of Urban Meyer. And Patrick turned up the podcast, and you were talking about Curtis Grant, and the officer leaned in and listened to some of the podcast, wanted to know where it was, took out his phone, and I believe subscribed to the podcast right then and there, went back to his car, gave Patrick a warning, not a ticket. And then Patrick sent me a picture of the warning and the podcast and the ticket that had the warning on it right below the podcast episode, and then sent that to me. So
there are certain parts of the country where you probably got two tickets.
I was going to say, it's fortunate it was in Ohio, a highway patrolman, as opposed to someplace else where he would have gotten maybe even hauled off to jail or something. But I love the part. I know who Urban Meyer is, but Tim who? That was awesome. That was there. That's my life right there, folks. Meetings are a critically important element of organizational life, and we spend time in meetings, and it needs to be leveraged, focused, valuable time. Urban, you were, and probably still are, a great leader of meetings. A couple of quick ideas before we get into a more formal discussion. Obviously, you recognize the power of meetings. What was your mindset? How did you approach? What was your strategy for having meetings as a coach?
I was very fortunate. If you look at my career, I've had probably the best of the best. Earl Bruce was very detailed in meetings, and Lou Holtz was the same way. Sonny Lubick, Bob Davey, those are the people that I worked for. And, I'm with Gene Smith, who was tremendous in that regard. So I think the number one thing is realizing people are very busy. You're not going to meet to meet. You want to. It's no different than when you're speaking to your team after practice. And I'm giving you this as an analogy that many people can share, in the corporate world or as an educator. If you have nothing to say, don't just wrap it up. Don't feel like you have to fill the empty space with time, because you want, when your voice is, as a leader, when you speak, you want people to listen. You don't want to have here it comes again. Here it comes again. And I was always very concerned about that. I didn't want to meet. And I wanted to make sure, and this is probably, if I did have to say the greatest strength, is I want everybody to have a value. I want everybody to be sitting on their edge of the chair, that when I ask for your opinion or the dialogue, if you can help our program, help our program. For example, we would have an assistant athletic director in our I wanted them in there. I want compliance in there. I want our trainer in there, our strength coach. I want everybody that's associated with our program in that staff meeting, but I want to hear from them. I want to hear about how not it's going okay. That's not why you're here. How to make us better, and how to, whether, and obviously the recruiting is it's the critical piece of coaching college football versus professional football. Is that tell us how to get better at this, because it's ever changing, and everybody has great ideas in this room. That's why I've hired them, is give us something to make us better.
The Meetings are critical business events where real work takes place. That's the philosophy that you have to have in your company, in your organization. Meetings are real business events, critical business events where real work takes place. Most importantly, it's possibly the most focused leadership activity that you engage in, because all your people are there and you got an opportunity to communicate with them, connect with them, collaborate with them, and align them to make decisions, share information, and solve problems, and get stuff done.
And think about the meetings we've all been in where it's a waste of time. And that you talk about in the previous podcast, we talked about a demotivator. That's a demotivator.
Huge.
When you walk into a meeting, you're not prepared, and you're filling space. And we've all, I'm guilty as anybody, walk out of the meeting and say, that was terrible. I have to do a better job because, you'd like to, I know you're going to go through some points of a good meeting, but there's not, every Wednesday was about recruiting. Every Thursday was about player development. So they knew they were prepared for those meetings. There's nothing worse than just calling a meeting, and we've had to do it before, and you're not prepared for it, and it's a demotivator.
Yep.
So organization, being on point, being succinct, and being efficient are very important. That's something we always try to do because I had respect for other people's time.
Meetings, every meeting is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. If in your organization you don't like the results you're getting from your meeting, change the way you design and manage those meetings. Meetings are an essential part of the way an organization builds culture and executes a strategy. Let's get to work. I want to go down a list of 10 guidelines for great meetings so that our listeners have a specific set of tactics that they can follow. But Urban, before I go down the 10 guidelines and we have a conversation around those, reflect back. What did you learn? What would you do differently? What did you learn about what not to do in a meeting?
Well, one of the most important things that I've always believed in, and I wanted to have everyone have value in that meeting or don't be there. Everyone have value and they feel like they own it. Ownership and love, we've made that clear. Those are the two greatest forms of motivation and inspiration within an organization. So I wanted when people sat in that meeting room that they understood the entire program was a result of other people's ideas coming together for the common good. And that's what, if you had to say, for 17 years, I was a head football coach. It evolved over time because I had great ideas from usually people within the organization say, hey, let's try this. And I tried to make that perfectly clear. If I had to do it over again, I would make it more user-friendly for maybe the people that weren't as outgoing or weren't as strong as they're sharing their opinion. My personality was such that I didn't want to waste time. If someone gave a thought, it better be well thought out. It better be, because we don't have time to waste here, especially during the season, and let's move forward. Over time, as you reevaluate, you think, okay, not every personality is very strong. Like, I give you a couple examples. Steve Adazio, Mickey Marotti, or some people are very strong. They're going to tell me what they think. And I usually would call on people throughout the day, say, Dave, give me your thoughts. Give me your thoughts, Tim. Give me your thoughts. And I want to make sure, for the person that wasn't as strong, they at times weren't feeling comfortable that they would give their opinion.
There are people who don't feel confident to speak up in a meeting, is what you're saying.
Right.
And recognizing who those folks are and creating space for them to communicate their thoughts and ideas is a critical element of this. All right, let's go down 10 guidelines for great meetings. If you're a note taker, take out your notebook and your pen. You're going to write these 10 things down. Number 1, only hold a meeting if it's necessary. That's the starting point. Don't have a meeting if the same information could be disseminated or covered in a memo, an email, or some kind of brief report. Meetings are not, you don't have meetings just to share information. There are better ways to simply share information than to have a meeting. And that's number 1, only hold a meeting if it's necessary. Agree on that one, Urban?
Absolutely.
A key, by the way, is to, I think this is helpful, differentiate between one-way information dissemination, that's sending an email or a report, and two-way information sharing, which is when you need a meeting. If it's one way, send a memo, send an email, send a report. If it's two-way, make it a meeting. However, make sure that the people in the meeting are the people that need to be there. Don't have 5 if you only need 3. Don't have 7 if you only need 2. Second guideline for having a great meeting is establish and then follow meeting success criteria. You can call it whatever you want. Guidelines, you can call it meeting rules, but success criteria. What are the standards or the guidelines or the rules, the meeting rules you're going to follow in your organization? And I recommend, obviously they're written down someplace, I'd put them on a wall, particularly in a place where you meet with regularity. So only hold a meeting if necessary, number one. And number two, have meeting success criteria. Urban, did you have that where I don't know if you wrote them down or not. I mean, the expectations for where people knew what they were, I know.
Yeah, I would always try to get that information out. If everybody, we had meetings, weekly meetings, and people knew. But if there was I would often send out, say, tomorrow we're going to cover the following, so at least I'm getting their minds thinking and they'll be prepared for those meetings. So I had strengths and weaknesses. That would be a strength of mine, is that we need to cover this. I want everybody's opinion on this. Some decisions need to be made. Here's Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4. And then usually I leave at the open, and I'd always look across the room. What do you got to help us, and move forward? But it was very clarity was, I think, a strength.
Yep, and that's numbers 3 and 4 in my list, and that is number 3 is have clear objectives. Know why you're in the meeting. What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the reason for being in this meeting? There's a purpose for it, and everyone knows what that is. And then number 4 is have an agenda for the meeting. Make sure you know what the steps are, what the agenda items are you're going to communicate. And again, that was the strength that you had. Everyone knew why the meeting was going to take place. They knew the purpose of it, the objective you're trying to follow, and you had an agenda. Did you disseminate the agenda ahead of time to people, or was it there at their spot on the table? How did you communicate what the agenda was for your meetings?
Usually I would send an email the night before, or I'd give it to my director of operations, say these are the things that I would cover. And if you remember, one of the greatest inventions in recent history is the iPad, and then also grease boards in your office, where I would, because you have these great ideas, and I was just, and this is a great thing for a leader as well. How many times have you written something down and you can't find what you've written down? And so have a great, that with technology nowadays, that should never happen. Mm-hmm. It's on your iPad or your phone, or whatever it is. And so I just think when I go back as a young coach and I start writing things down, and you're like, where is that? And you should never have that issue anymore with the technology available.
So why is it that from time to time you email me and ask me, hey, Tim, could you send me a certain file? Another topic.
We'll discuss that.
We'll move on from that one. The fifth one is provide all necessary information prior to having the meeting, and make sure everyone understands they are responsible for coming to the meeting prepared.
Oh, strong. And once again, I think this is, if people feel that they have value and they have ownership in what you're doing, those are usually the best meetings. That's where you're going to get very productive, very efficient meeting time. And if you're very clear what the objectives are of the meetings.
Which then pushes to number 6, meeting participants, everyone who's involved in it, come on time, be prepared. When you speak, be concise and to the point. Don't ramble. I know you you got very frustrated. People wouldn't ramble. Well, they did once, and they would never do it a second time.
It's like this is levity here, but where they say, well, honestly, or they say, in my opinion, and you just wasted time. Well, I would say, honestly, well, thank God you're not lying to me here.
To be truthful with you.
Yeah. To be honestly, or in my opinion, I'm like, well, I know it's your opinion. That's why I asked you. But, and I would have fun with that at times. But it is at times that is frustrating when because you're just very time sensitive, especially during the season.
And that's the whole point of this, is that go back to my thesis at the beginning, my opening statement about meetings are critical. They're times for critical business work. It's real work is done in a meeting. I mean, real work, and it's real leadership work. And I'm not sure we treat it with the gravity that it deserves and understanding. Focus, effort, discipline, energy is critically important. I mean, meetings are powerful things, and so we need to approach them that way.
Here, let's hold that thought, Tim. This relates back to one of the strongest podcasts we had about core versus concept. So when Tim Kight's running a meeting, you're going about your business, you want someone's opinion. The people that most likely you're going to ask for their opinion are people that are very strong in their core. You don't want to say, okay, for example, I'd say, Tim, tell me your thoughts on this. You look back at me and go, well, I'm not sure. What's your thoughts? I just wasted time. And all these people sitting around, I probably won't ask you again. But I'm going to ask someone who I know has given a lot of thought to it. Remember the core versus concept. Core is for your heart. That's what you believe in. A concept is driven by narrative, by environment, by society. I'm not real interested in that. I'm interested in your opinion. That's why I've asked you. And so I think that's very, for young, I go back when I first started coaching and when I was 25 years old and sitting in the Lou Holtz staff meeting. If Lou Holtz called on you and wanted your opinion, guess what he wanted? Your opinion. And he wanted it very fast and well thought out.
What do you believe?
Yeah, what do you believe? I didn't. When I ask you what you believe, I'm not asking what the narrative is out there because you can turn on TV and hear that. I want your opinion. And it's almost like you should take that, visualize, take advantage of that moment. That's your time. You better be prepared. How do you be prepared? You have a very strong core beliefs and core values that you believe in.
You've done your homework.
Yeah, whether it be strategy, whether it be culture, whatever. Be very strong. And when you're given that opportunity to talk to the boss or talk to the CEO or talk to the head coach, say, this is my belief, and I'm going to share it with you right now. And give it to them.
And here's why I believe it. I can back it up with data, with evidence, with facts.
And then guess what happens next time he has a meeting? He's going to ask you again. And then all of a sudden he's going to ask you again. And then all of a sudden the opportunities start to show up because you become, remember we said, be the one.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
All right, now let me take on that, though, because that's a wonderful advice to everyone listening. There's a dangerous side to that. And I've seen this happen in a great deal of business meetings where the young folks trying to vie for position start posturing and they start the politicking, and it's pretty unattractive. You're not saying that, though. You're talking about the fundamentals of an agenda goes out, reading materials go out. They say we're going to cover these topics in this order at tomorrow's meeting. Read this, be prepared. And you're saying study the agenda, study the attendant materials, have a point of view. Come ready to be prepared if called upon, and or you see an opportunity to share and bring value to the meeting. But it's a we, not a me perspective. Agreed?
I agree. And I've seen the other side, what you just mentioned. And, that, in my opinion, that gets exposed rather quickly unless you're a professional at it. If you, when you get asked your opinion, be very clear, be very firm with your opinion, and understanding that he might not agree, he or she might not agree with that opinion. However, that's your core opinion. Mm-hmm. And I found this too over time because I've not always been in situations where I agree with people, but the respect you earn in a meeting when someone is very clear you might disagree with it, but once again, isn't conflict, embrace the discomfort. That at times that makes you grow. A matter of fact, some of the greatest decisions I was a part of is because had some very good conflict. Both of the two of us have had many different conversations
on things we don't agree on.
Yeah, but the respect was because it was I know it was well thought out, and that's why I'm asking you. There's other people that they're going to say what you want to hear, and that really goes nowhere. Great conversation here, by the way. This is, to me, I'm so glad we did this. I didn't realize this was a topic. This is a game changer for leaders, and you want to earn the respect of those people walking into staff meetings. Instantaneous respect. You're prepared. You're very respected of their time. You're very efficient, but you give value and ownership to the people in that meeting room. And that, I think that was one of the strengths over years. And everybody has to understand that the product that we're all trying to do is a product of everyone's ideas. There's no one immune to that. Now, some are stronger than others, share with that opinion, but I love this topic.
Let me comment to the people who are listening who aren't a leader or supervisor, but you're in a meeting. We've obviously just given you advice to come to the meeting prepared, come to the meeting ready to share a point of view, make it educated and thoughtful. Here's another piece of advice to those in that situation. When someone else is speaking, when anyone else is speaking in the meeting, give them your full attention and respect.
Absolute.
And don't fight. I mean, you can argue respectfully. You can debate respectfully. Listen to what everyone says, however. That's critically important. And I believe that, and I mentioned it earlier, maybe I went through too quickly, but communicating, connecting, and collaborating are critical elements of it. You build culture in a meeting. You build relationships. You get to know each other in a meeting. You get to know each other's ideas in a meeting. You get to evaluate strategy in a meeting. You get to evaluate tactics in a meeting.
And one of my errors, as we discussed prior to the podcast, might have been that just the personality that I have on understanding the time sensitivity of what's going on is that if I didn't agree with the suggestion, idea, whatever, I would kind of move on unless I had a great deal of respect for that person saying it. I knew it was well thought out, as opposed to regardless, whether, age, experience, whatever comes into it, the R word, respect, listen, and then move on or whatever. But I was, once again, it was just the time sensitivity and everyone sitting in that meeting room when there's so much work to be done, as many can probably relate to that. But I think that was something that I could improve upon. There would be certain people I'd listen to with more intent than others just because of experience.
And I think there's a wisdom element to that where you have to be able to, as a leader, recognize when you know that person, or you think or sense that person who's ineffective, a little bit less articulate, might have something great to say, and you help them say it.
Right.
As opposed to rushing past them because they're not as efficient.
Well, I think this conversation is twofold for the listeners. One is that the person leading the meeting is what we just talked about. You have to be respectful. You have to listen within great intent, and then move forward with the meeting. It's also for the person in that meeting. There's nothing wrong with giving your opinion. That's why you're asked. It's not a right or wrong, the true false question here. This is when you're asked for your opinion. That's why there is nothing greater as a leader to walk in a staff room and know that you have complete confidence with most everybody, if not everybody in that room, and you're going to solve a problem together. There's nothing worse than having, lack of confidence in that room because whether it was, lack of courage to speak up or not well thought out, that's not a good feeling for the CEO or the person running the meeting.
Practice your listening. And again, not the leader for the meeting, but just participants. Learn to be a world-class listener. And here's another little subtle suggestion. Observe. Pay attention visually as well as verbally. And I think it is really important for everyone to listen with their eyes, not just their ears. There's reasons for that, but when be attentive, pay very careful attention in a meeting. It's amazing what you can learn if you really pay attention. But if you don't listen and all you're thinking about is your agenda, all you're thinking about is your ideas, and you're not really paying attention to your colleagues in the meeting, you're not learning about the people you work with, you're not learning about other people's ideas, approaches, and styles, and you miss something. And as I say, meetings are great opportunities to build a culture, build connection, build collaboration with people. The seventh guideline for having a great meeting, it's pretty common sense at this point, follow the agenda. Start on time and end on time. And that may sound like, well, it is common sense. It is not common practice. There needs to be a cultural expectation. The meeting is going to start on time and the meeting is going to end on time. And we've all violated that. I mean,
I guess let's when it does happen, it should be something's going on.
Yeah.
That's inordinate. When you have a meeting go prolonged or something happens that you're being late for the meeting. That can't be a normal, because we've all been there. Something shows up on your desk, you get that phone call, someone walks in your office, you're 10 minutes late for the meeting. That happens. That can't be normal, or you lose, it becomes a demotivator.
Warning for the driver leaders, warning for the Ds, the alpha males, the alpha females on the podcast. And Urban, comment on this, because you're one of those. You're alpha male, not the alpha female. But here's something that I've seen the really strong leaders do sometimes that's a little bit of a problem. and that is they reserve the right to be late to a meeting, but no one else can be. Have you seen that?
Sure. I think we're all probably guilty of that. Like I said, if you're late to a meeting, there has to be a
good reason.
There's got to be. And same with the, the one thing I would always say, the family, when there's a family issue, all rules are off. Was because you overslept or because you something, that's a problem. But and I think the clarity within your organization, that made me, when I worked for Sonny Lubick, he made that perfectly clear. When there was a family situation, that was number one. Number two was your job, and he held true to that. I'd like to think that I always held. Number one was now if it was some issue that was personal or something, that was a problem.
The 8th guideline for a great meeting is notes are taken and they're archived and kept. Particularly folks in a business setting, if you're not going to take notes on the meeting, if someone is not actually documenting what was said, what decisions were made, what commitments were agreed to, it's going to be really difficult to follow up on that, and some important information or some important decisions that came at the high cost of investing time and effort will get lost. So make sure that notes are taken, they're recorded, and they're appropriately archived or stored and then followed up on. Number 9, decisions and assigned actions are appointed to people, meaning that it's not generic. There's a who, what, when, and how. And those things there's clarity of action, and then there's accountability to doing the things that people committed to in that meeting. And then the 10th and final guideline for a great meeting is, and I think this is really important, and it's done so rarely, and that is, the Army calls this an AAR, an after-action review. And that is that meeting effectiveness is reviewed on a regular basis, and we evaluate what did we do in that meeting that we want to repeat, what did we do in that meeting we want to make better, and what did we do in that meeting that's ineffective, we don't want to do it again. Evaluate how the meeting went. It's feedback, it's assessment, it's grading yourself on how the meeting went. And I think that's an essential. The only way you're going to get better is to identify those areas that need to be improved, to identify those things that should be repeated, and identify those things that need to be eliminated. Did you guys do that, Urban, in the various teams where you evaluated meeting effectiveness and made adjustments based on how you guys graded yourself in meetings?
Well, it's a self-evaluation process of everything you do, and so I would rely on my director of operations and ask them, and our strength coach. I think you got to be careful to, giving too much input. But I would, I think we tried to do that. I would always say, hey, what can we do better, and and how do we get more engagement, et cetera.
I know I would sit on some meetings, and you'd turn to me after the meeting and say, how did you think that went, and would you make? I thought you were very open about how. So
the self-reflection is something that, we talked about this in one of the recent podcasts as well, is that as hard as that is, for some people that's very easy. That's never been a problem for me, is that, often, some people are too hard on themselves, and other people just don't want to go there. But I think self-evaluation in everything you do is very important.
Let's wrap this up. The meetings are critical business events where real work takes place. A lot of companies have a lot of unnecessary or poorly managed meetings, and as a consequence, they are at best irritating and at worst counterproductive. Great leaders, on the other hand, have great meetings. People love to go to a meeting that's run by a great leader. As we wrap this up, any closing thoughts about the power of meetings inside an organization?
Yeah, I think Lou Holtz was one of the best I've ever been around. I felt better when I left his meetings. I can't say that about every other situation I've been in, but I would always feel like I received a nugget. And actually, this is a Lou Holtzism that I would have on the board at times, and that was how do you value or how do you evaluate the morale of a team or an individual? And his is not the score. He would say not the score, not the one loss, but are they getting better? Mm-hmm. Think about what I just said. So how do you evaluate someone's morale, a team's morale and an individual's morale? It's not whether you win or lose. Of course, that's going to have issues or results. But if a human being believes they are getting better, their morale is high. So if you walk into a staff meeting and felt like you wasted time, that's the opposite. Morale is low. If you walk into a staff meeting and think, I just got better. Matter of fact, that's going to help me in my career. That's going to help me in my family. That's going to help me move along and do a better job. The morale is extremely high. And I would always put that on the board right behind me and remind myself as well, I have a job to do here today. I want a bunch of high morale. I want people going as hard as they possibly can. It's my job to be very efficient and make someone better, make them better in here today.
Wow. That's a great principle to finish this up on. Every meeting is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. And if you're not getting the results from your meetings that you want to get, then you need to change the way that you design or manage your meetings. If people at the end of a meeting can't say, I got better today because I went to that meeting. If they don't say, I'm clearer today because I went to that meeting, you got to go fix something. Every meeting is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. Go do the work.